paid off.
So, Bias, if I may ask you, about the products that your company has, what are the, key successes during this pandemic? Which products have done very well, especially during this pandemic?
Look, the products that have done well for us, clearly anything that's contactless, has been important for the market, and we've benefited from that. One of our high points, for example, is like many others, we offer UPI, and our UPI, our biggest customers like Amazon switched 100% from cards to remote pay and UPI, and we had to fine tune our solutions for customers like them, and then we've discovered that we actually run the highest success rates on UPI across any player in the country, because we fine tune for our big, huge, global customers, and so those have been some of the successes that we've had, during the year.
All right. Thanks. So Avinash, Zaggle is a leader traditionally in the loyalty and rewards business, but now I believe it also specializes in expense management systems. So I believe this is more relevant during the pandemic and of course beyond, because several companies are putting this expense management system in place. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how has this impacted your business and what are the key challenges that you're facing?
You're on mute, Avinash.
Yeah, hi. So it's been a very interesting phase for us, Ram. When the pandemic hit, we were, as everybody else, a little concerned as to how are we going to cope. Our first priority was our employees. We wanted to make sure, as Vyas said, that people are able to work from home, people are comfortable, people are taken care of. And second, most important was our customers, right? So we got in touch with a lot of our customers, also customers who were on the verge of signing for the platform. So what we saw was that possibly because of the pandemic kicking in, a lot of contracts and a lot of discussions that we were having with a lot of enterprises, but also mid-sized businesses, a lot of them reached fruition signing during this pandemic. And we got a lot of contracts because everybody was looking to figure out how can I control costs. The one very interesting pattern that we saw was the last thing that almost all businesses wanted to do was to retrench their employees. So before they took any of those steps, people wanted to say, what are actually my costs? How can I control them? Is there a way for me to, look at applying science and tech and design thinking to my expenses and bring in some, efficiency there? And a lot of the thinking historically has been around accounting packages. And what's very clearly shifted is that most businesses and companies are looking beyond their CFO's office to figure out how to control costs. Cost is no more the responsibility only of the CFO or the CEO. It's a pan-organization requirement. And hence, the way the data is presented, the way data is consumed and analyzed has to be something that, say, an HR head should be able to, act upon. A marketing head should be able to act upon, not just people who understand the accounting packages. So that is one very interesting phenomena that we saw, that a lot of companies and businesses started to adopt this. Challenges, obviously, we had the same set of challenges that everybody had. A lot of it was, as they say, more in our own minds. We were very worried as to how this whole thing was going to shape in the initial few weeks. And as business started to grow and, we started to get more and more contracts, we saw a new energy kicking into the team. And the team was looking at this as now more of an opportunity, genuinely more of an opportunity to go out there and figure out what partnerships can we, sign up. So, for example, we signed up a bunch of banks with whom we were talking to partner to cross-sell our expense management platform to their SME customers. Right? So whether it's DBS, whether it's ICICI, Yes Bank, a lot of these partnerships that we were talking of for a few months before that all converted into signing, and now we are getting a very decent amount of traction there.
Okay, thank you. Sachin, Zeta is a lead. I believe you guys are you've built some stack for FIs for cards, loans, authentication, FRM businesses, etc. Just wanted to know from your standpoint, the very first question for you would be, what's your view on opportunities that lie ahead, and where are the potholes that you see in the line of business that you're operating?
Yeah, thank you, Ram. So I think the big change that the pandemic has brought about is this realization that payments are no longer a matter of convenience, right? It's almost a necessity. And we've seen this over the last few months. We've seen consumer behavior change. There's been a definite sort of a flight to digital. There's been a flight to essentials. And as you know, Bias was mentioning, there's been a flight to consumers preferring contactless, right? The question really is which of these behaviors will stick and become permanent. Right? And I think from an industry perspective, and to state the blindingly obvious, right? I think digital payments in India has made great progress over the last 4 to 5 years. We've achieved, I think, 3x more volumes over the last 3 years than we did in the 10 years preceding that. So whether it is creating the basic infrastructure, railroads, the rapid adoption of real-time payments, the introduction of newer and more sophisticated payments and acceptance mechanisms, the progress has been substantial, and it's got us to about 100 million transactions per day, give or take. But in my view, if we are to truly democratize the digitization of payments and get to 10x of where we are today, so get to a billion transactions per day, say by 2025, then there are three big challenges that we need to address. Right? The first is the overarching problem of digital access and ensuring adoption. And as an example, we have over 850 million debit cards in India. Debit cards are by far the most all-pervasive payments instrument. However, less than 10% are active at POS. Right? And most of that activity, even today, happens only in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities. All of us talk about UPI and the fact that adoption of UPI is increasing. The fact is that there are still only about 100 million or so UPI users. So the question, in my mind is, how can we sort of create enough awareness and engagement amongst non-users and move them to the digital payments bandwagon and get them to stay there? I think a big part of the problem has to be, solving for acceptance penetration, and I'm sure Bias would have far more insights there. But 5 million or so physical POS terminals in the country the size and breadth of India is grossly inadequate. The second challenge that I want to talk about is the fact that a majority of the banks in India today run their entire system off of legacy technology stacks, and these stacks are frankly relics from another era. I mean, there's no other way to put it. These stacks not only inhibit the kind of experiences that you can provide to your customers, they slow down GTM cycles considerably, and they're not scalable, right? And this potentially results in more friction, in higher transaction failures, and that has a direct impact on offtake. And the third sort of challenge that we need to address as an industry, and I think severely dent consumer confidence in digital payments, is around managing security and risk, and that's an ongoing sort of a consideration and requires massive collaboration across the board. And so some of these areas around technology, around security, around removing friction, improving activation and engagement is where we at Zeta feel we can really, really add value through our cloud native, API friendly, mobile first tech stack. So we provide an integrated core and processing platform, and so everything from a modern cloud-based core banking system to a modern switch, a card management system, an ACS, and really intuitive sort of front-end UI UX. And to be fair, I think post-COVID, we've really seen banks now taking cognizance of some of these challenges, embarking towards end-to-end digitization, and we're having some really great deployments and conversations.
Thanks, Sachin. I mean, it's great to know the pandemic has actually impacted everyone, but it's great to know that the businesses have stood up to take this as a challenge. And some of the topics that your businesses are rolling out have been quite useful in broadening the digital payments. So moving on, the question is about the regulatory ecosystem. So Avinash, which are the segment of payment products have witnessed a challenge in terms of keeping up with the fast-paced developments in the payment space and regulatory development, and how is it impacting?
Well, I think it's a combination, right? In some areas, regulators have moved very fast. In other areas, regulation possibly needs to move a little faster. I think the pandemic also brought to the foray a lot of areas which are traditionally done in a particular way, which need to be completely relooked at. I'll just give you a very simple example, right? If you want to open a current account today for a business, and that's something that we are grappling with as we are working on our new banking platform. The one of the requirements that the regulator has is that there's an in-site visit that is required. Right? So somebody has to go to the office premise of this business before the account can be opened. Now, with the gig economy kicking off, and with people working literally from everywhere that they want, one of the big issues that crops up is what is an office, right? And where does this on-site visit actually happen? And is there any relevance to this today, given the pandemic, right? So these are kind of things which are possibly areas where regulation could relook at, right? But overall, I think businesses have not necessarily had challenges, Ram, coping with the speed of regulation. I would say a lot of businesses, both in fintech and more so traditional, as Sachin said, the banks and other ecosystem players have struggled because a lot of the things that have been spoken of in conferences like this have not actually got executed in those institutions, right? So we all talk of digitization, we all talk of being able to actually, use AI and chatbots. But if you actually look under the hood, a lot of the institutions have actually been found, lacking, if I may use the word, in the level of digitization and automation that they have actually used. And this is true for PSU banks, but it's also true for a lot of private banks. Right? These are the kind of things which, genuinely we as an ecosystem, we genuinely all have to commit to increasing the digitization and improving the consumer experience, improving the experience of businesses who are using these products and services. Otherwise, we just talk in these forums, but when it actually comes to much greater adoption, we're going to see that gap, right? Because consumers they're very smart. They see through this. So if we as an ecosystem can collaborate and work towards making sure that, the experience is seamless, I think we'll see that 10x adoption. Until then, we have some distance to cover.
No, so Avinash, just a supplementary question to you. Just the question for you is basically the regulatory impact. I know Zaggle is in the rewards, gift cards, and stuff, and a sudden regulation someday. So my question to you is there a regulatory burden at this stage in the business that you're operating in? Are there any opportunity, or do you think the regulations need to be there in some lines of your business?
So I think more than the burden, Ram, what I would say is there is a certain degree of regulatory uncertainty. I wouldn't say that's necessarily coming from the regulator alone, but overall the chatter that's there. What we would, from our perspective in Zaggle, would look forward to is a more stable environment around regulation. Right? Whatever the regime is, whether it's around MDR or whatever, as long as we know that this is how it's going to be, and it's going to be for the next foreseeable years, we can build a business model around that. Right? The challenge that I personally feel is if it keeps changing, right, and changing at a very fast pace, then for a business to actually, a fintech to build a business model around the rules becomes very tough, right? So I mean, to give you a cricket example, just tell us whether we are playing T20 or one-day cricket, right? What are the rules? We'll adapt to that. We're extremely flexible. Indians are extremely flexible, and fintechs are very flexible. Startups are very flexible. So, but we just don't want it to change between 2020 and ODIs and test matches. Just stability.
Thanks, Avinash. So, Sachin, I don't know whether you agree with what Avinash has just mentioned, but as you know, many non-banking players, they are entering in the payments industry. So, what do you think is the role of technology in general and service providers like Zeta in particular? Um, what role can they play to accelerate this trends of the non-banking players entering into the payment sector? And there is also a view that new entrants must follow the regulations in the payment industry. So, what's your view?
I think that's a great question, Ram. I'm actually reminded of something that Brett King, who's the erstwhile CEO of the erstwhile Movin Bank, very famous, said, actually written a book called "Banking Everywhere but Never at a Bank." And I think India's commerce landscape, honestly, is an apt example of that. And over the last few years, the biggest drivers of digital payments growth in India have been the emergence of new commerce platforms, right? Um, whether it's the likes of Paytm and Google Pay and Phone Pay sort of becoming preferred commerce interfaces, or the multitude of fintechs, wanting to create a neo-banking experience. And that experience could be a lending experience, it could be a savings account experience, it could be a prepaid experience, it could be a combination of these. But the underlying payment instruments, the bank accounts, the credit cards, the debit cards, are all owned by licensed regulated entities. So how the vehicle of delivery has changed. The bank, in some sense, continues to be the custodian of the regulation and compliance, but the non-bank platform now delivers the enhanced customer value. And all of this, by the way, gets done using modern technology. This is a space that we at Zeta actually call embeddable banking. And the objective here is to help banks and fintechs and commerce partners collaborate and deliver hyper-personalized experiences. So, for example, if a fintech wants to launch a lending experience for a certain market segment, Zeta will sit between the fintech and the bank, provide the fintech with a sandbox which would take care of all of the RBI compliances, and the fintech can basically focus on creating a really great customer value proposition. Your second question on whether non-banks should be regulated. My personal view is that regulation should cover entity that directly manages customers' funds, right, and directly being the operative word. Example: payment aggregators, or any entity that's entering an existing regulated space. So, if a fintech, for example, wants to directly launch a prepaid instrument, then they ought to be licensed under the PPI regime, right? I mean, there's no question about the fact that protecting customer safety and security is paramount. Having said that, and because we're in the technology space, every now and then, ecosystem participants might come up with a revolutionary idea that's backed by technology that is so novel that existing regulations may not cover them. In that case, I think the regulator should enable like a graded approach, whereby such technology is tested in a controlled manner before being allowed to go to the larger market. And RBI's regulatory sandbox initiative is a great step in that direction. But I'd say this last 10 seconds. In general, from a regulation perspective, I think RBI has been very, very progressive. I would, in fact, go to the extent of saying that a lot of times the industry struggles to keep pace with new opportunities that regulation brings along. And you know this, right? I mean, really progressive regulations like tokenization, recurring payments, account aggregator frameworks, offline authorizations, etc., etc. Are potential game changers. And some of these have been on the table from RBI for close to 2 years now. Right. The fact is that industry and banks in particular are just slow to adopt. And to sort of echo what Vinash was saying, a large part of the reason they're slow is because their current technology stack, whether you're a PSU or you're a private sector bank, just doesn't support faster deployments.
Thanks, Sachin. So, Bias, do you share the views echoed by Sachin and Avinash? Could you also give a glimpse of the impact of regulations on the products that you're dealing with?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I agree with what both of them have said. And, if I look, I think we've had a lot of good regulations, things that have moved us forward. But one of the characteristics we have is we go through somewhat from clarity to uncertainty and confusion. New regulations come out, everyone is confused. What does this mean? How is it going to impact us? And we spend an inordinate amount of time trying to get clarity. We get semi-clarity, then things change again, right? So this, Avinash had mentioned earlier, I think uncertainty is a killer for any industry, right? Industry and investors like certainty, and you can operate and start planning when you have certainty. So I think that has been one of the big downsides on this front is the uncertainty. One day MDR went to zero. There was question, is it just for, RuPay and UPI, or is it also for Visa and MasterCard, or are they going to go after Visa and MasterCard next, right? It brings a lot of uncertainty to the industry. The other one that has, stands out for me is some of these regulations fly in the face of economic logic, right? Zero MDR is an example. You do want players who offer and create this infrastructure to have economic value and get paid for that. So by zeroing out MDR, you're taking away the economic value of playing. Same thing as they've put zero MDR for large businesses who can actually afford to pay MDR and BIPs, while not offering the zero MDR to the small merchants for whom MDR is actually a bigger challenge. And then the other one is you look at payment aggregators. Payment aggregators are now required to monitor that the products sold by merchants are not fake. That's the role. Should not be a role of a payment aggregator who's a facilitator, right? It's the government trying to get the payment aggregator to do what they themselves have failed to do. So those are the things, again, doesn't make sense. The fourth element to me is it often is impractical. This 30% limit for UPI transactions. How is a player going to manage that? You can't control the number of merchants you sign on, because every player can sign on every merchant. Merchants have multiple payment providers, right? So how do you determine what is 30%? You can't stop 30% of transactions. You may hit 30% on 22nd of the month. What are you going to do after that? Are you going to stop taking transactions after that? So those elements of regulations, the uncertainty, the lack of economic logic in some cases, and impractical ideas, I think slow us down and create a lot of chaos in the industry before there is clarity. So I think if we could somehow skip that step and have pre-discussions that address these things, I think the industry would move in a faster and more effective and efficient manner.
Thanks, BS. Sachin, I think one other issue that we are is the legacy technology. Businesses are now working off legacy technology, and we know that there is advanced technology some of the businesses they use. So, given the onset of COVID and immediate need to go digital, have you seen a change in the mindset of banks or the players or partners that you work with to modernize the legacy payment tech platform with new age solutions that probably your company or others provide?
Yeah, I mean, so this is something that we at Zeta feel very, very passionate about, and I think it's extremely important that the industry and specifically banks address this this legacy tech versus modern tech conundrum quickly. Let me ask you folks a question: how often does your Apple or Google or Microsoft upgrade your your mobile apps or your operating systems? Once every month, maybe every fortnight. Do you know how often bank stacks get upgraded? Once every 2 years, once every 3 years. And the question, really is that if this is, unheard of in the new software world, why should it be different in the banking world? The basic point is that the way software is written today has changed considerably over the last 5 to 10 years. The fact also is that the current banking technology stacks are really, really inflexible. They've been built 20, 25 years back on mainframe, monolithic software, written in archaic languages, and are not really built to create the kind of experiences that modern customers demand and deserve. And as a product manager, I've been through this myself. Not only do new product launches and change requests take time, very often what gets delivered at the end of the cycle is vastly inferior to what was initially envisaged. And let me talk about a couple of sort of related and pertinent problems. Right? Most of us who've been associated with banks would know this, that existing banking technology stacks are basically a composition of multiple different service providers. Right? So someone will provide you with a core banking system, someone else will provide you with a payment switch, a third vendor would deploy a card management system, and then basically there'll be one vendor who'll stitch up a mobile app for you. Now, mishmash, patchwork of a system is heavily bandaged and done together, and that inhibits scale, that inhibits time to market, and it of course limits the kind of experiences that you can provide. A lot of us consider Apple to be the benchmark on design and experience is partly because they control every single component of their stack. Right from the operating systems to the hardware components to the chipset, everything is controlled by Apple. The other, very, very, contextual and topical sort of problem is that of scalability. And I'll give you a couple of recent examples, right? Whenever some of our large e-com merchants run their festive season sales, and this happens every year, when Flipkart does its Big Billion Day sale or Amazon runs its festive sales, issuer system experience frequent downtimes. And now with UPI transactions scaling the way they are, and specifically microtransactions happening at scale, this problem becomes even more pronounced. And that's because these bank systems really haven't been architected for scale. By contrast, cloud native stacks, like ourselves, like Zeta, we provide for infinite scalability. We actually demonstrated, 1 million transactions per second in front of a live audience in our ACS. And the reason I'm telling you this is because 1 million is an obscene number. It's 6x the world's volume, but that's just the power of cloud computing. And so what I'm trying to say is that there have been attempts made by banks to digitize certain workflows, right? So a bank will try and digitize an onboarding workflow, or pick up another workflow and try and digitize it, but it's not enough. The underlying plumbing needs to be fixed. And we at Zeta really think of technology from a first principles basis. We think that the next phase of growth will be driven by technology stacks that are composite, that are end to end, mobile first, API friendly, cloud native, all of those good things, right? And that give the banks the freedom to build world class experiences. And I think that fundamental shift in thinking is what we are seeing now. To be honest, we're seeing banks think like tech led organizations, as opposed to banks who also have technology. And the analogy that we often quote to some of our banks is that of a Barnes and Noble that owns a brick and mortar bookshop going digital versus an Amazon, which is inherently a tech company selling books. The experience that customers get is vastly different, and that's the evolution in thinking that fortunately we're now observing and has accelerated post the pandemic.
Hey, thanks, Sachin. So, Riaz, moving to you. Your firm and many other firms these days are focusing on the role of analytics, VAS, value-added services, and to some extent interoperability wherever it is possible. So, just wanted to get your thoughts on what are the potholes when it comes to the data and analytics point of view.
Look, I think for us, the key thing in data analytics is while we're able to assess the transaction data that go through us, the ownership of the data is actually split because we work with partner banks and we cannot individually separate sell out data for any of the transactions because the data is actually owned by our partner banks. So we do get a lot of aggregate data, we do analytics, and we can provide it to our merchant partners like the banks, but we don't actually offer it, to anybody else. It's a limitation of the model we have, but I think we've been able to, since we see data across multiple banks, we actually create a really good picture of what's going on in the industry, and we are able to share that, in an anonymized way with our bank partners. Right. But we're not yet in the place where we can actually monetize the data yet. I would love to be able to do that. We haven't figured that out yet.
Thanks, guys. So, Avinash, if I may ask you the same question around data and analytics, and also you can touch upon what Sachin was talking about, the difference between the legacy systems and how in the banking there is a need to constantly upgrade the system. So, just want to check. I mean, because this is one of the key potholes that we've been hearing. Especially when it comes to the expansion of digital payments.
Yeah, and the two are linked. I agree with Sachin on this. The challenge with data is also linked with a lot of the data actually sitting with the legacy systems in the banks. And how do you access that data in real time? The key with data, Ram, as you would very well know, is it's not that what data do you have, right? It is, do you have that access to that information in real time so that you can action on that, right? So I'll give you an example. We are on the cusp of launching our first business credit card in partnership with Visa, which is called the Founders Card. And one of the things that we are trying to do there is to figure out how can we make more intelligent lending decisions, right? How can we decide who amongst the business, especially the SMEs, founders of SMEs, who should get the card, who should not get the card? Now, access to data information, whether it's from the banks, whether it's from the accounting softwares that these entities have, like Tally, etc., it's very disparate. It is, all across the board. Even integrations with systems like GST, etc., take a lot of time, although it's getting better over time. But it is something that really inhibits access to credit to a whole host of SMEs in the country. I mean, imagine if that access to information was democratized, how easily could a lot of players make their lending decisions. The other piece, that the second part that you mentioned, is that how banks can cope. I don't know if banks would be able to convert from their legacy systems to new age systems overnight. I believe that it will require both from a regulatory perspective some intervention. It may also require that banks co-create with fintechs, right? So it could be that some pieces are still sitting with the bank, the issuer, the license, the trust part of the business possibly could remain with the bank. The innovation, the user experience, the AI, the ML, the OCR, for example, that we use so extensively on our expense management platform, those kinds of things are probably best sitting with fintechs. And I think that could be a good way forward. And I think it's already happening in a very big way. But if bank backend systems do become more robust and more API friendly, that would be really phenomenal for the fintechs as well as the ecosystem.
Thanks, Avinash. We've got like 4 questions from the audience, but one common thread is they want the speakers' suggestions. Where are the probable gaps which needs to be filled in from a regulatory standpoint to catch up with the developments in payments? So I think this is cutting across to all the speakers. If I may improvise the question, what do you think? What would be one recommendation that you would like to give to the viewers that would help in the development or deepening of digital payments? I'll probably go with Avinash first.
Sure. So I'll give you 3 and very quickly, right? So the first one, which I mentioned, is, can we have a stable, predictable environment with regulation? I'm okay with, any of the things that the regulator is asking, because the regulator is asking for things which are reasonably logical. There are, reasons for that. But if there is predictability, that's great. The second 2 are very specific. One is around things like video KYC. Video KYC is great, right? Can we expand it to non-banks? Can we expand it to entities beyond individuals and allow businesses to start, doing some form of video KYC, right? Because this is really, if you compare how the paper KYC works,
We've just completed this thing. So maybe,
One last one last quick point. The 2,000 limit on contactless, can the customer set the limit instead of it being set by the regulator?
Thank you. Sachin.
No, I think the recommendations have all been made, predictability regulations and, a couple that Avinash just spoke about. I'd like the industry to also, take cognizance of the fact that there have been opportunities that have been put on the table by the regulator. And if we can, as an industry, work towards, following through on some of those opportunities around tokenization, around risk-based authentication, for example, and stuff like that. I think that's where, we need to focus our energies as well.
Thank you, Sachin. Bias. Bias, you're on mute.
Rapidly remove, rapidly remove uncertainty. To me, that's the number one priority.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone and viewers. I'm sure you've seen diligently some of our speakers have tried to compensate the existing potholes. But thank you so much, IAMAI, for this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to everyone, and thank you, Mr. Rakapan. This was a really good session. Thank you to the audience. We will see you all in yet another exciting session coming up in a short while. And meanwhile, do visit our virtual exhibition space to check out our partner booths and their offerings. Please specifically visit Lyra's booth to participate in their special lucky draw and win exciting prizes. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panel.
Welcome to our virtual conference. Payments Council of India and Lyra presents Digital Money 2020 powered by PhonePe. Let us start a panel discussion on demonetization and COVID-19, fostering payment innovations through uncertainties. Let me start by introducing our moderator for the session, Mr. Deepak Chandani, Managing Director, South Asia and Middle East Worldline. Welcome, sir. Now, welcoming our esteemed panelists for the session, Mr. A.P. Hutta, Consultant, Swift India, Mr. Manish Patel, Founder and CEO, mSwipe, Mr. Jata Mohan, Senior Director, Payments FIS, Mr. Hemant Kala, Vice President, Financial Services and Payments, PhonePe. Before I request Mr. Chandani to take the discussion forward, I'm requesting all attendees to keep their questions in the chat box, and the panel will address a selected few at the end of the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining this session. I will start by introducing the panelists a little more fully than our host has, so that you can appreciate who we have and the eminence of the panel that we have before us. And then after that, I will put a few questions to the panel requesting their views. Let me start first with Mr. A.P. Hutta. He is a former MD and CEO of NPCI. And right from the start, February 2009 to August 2017, he headed up NPCI. He was also GM at Reserve Bank of India and was the first head of the Department of Payments and Settlement System from 2005 to 2008. He was at the helm of NPCI at the time of demonetization, so he will have a particular perspective, I think, he can share with us around demonetization and its impact. He's been nominated to be a member of the Governing Council of RBI's proposed Innovation Hub. So welcome, Mr. Hutta, a lifelong experience in the payment business. Sujata Mohan is the head of payments at APMEA region for FIS Global. Prior to joining FIS, she worked at RBL Bank as the head of digital and new initiatives. She's also been the recipient of Women in FinTech Award in 2019 and has been called out as the top 30 FinTech influencers of 2020. She's been an active participant in the payment industry in India. Welcome, Sujata. We look forward to your perspectives. Let me go next to Hemant Kala. He leads payment and financial services for PhonePe. He's been part of the core team at PhonePe, building the payments business from its very early days. Prior to PhonePe, he was instrumental in driving the payment strategy for Flipkart and building a strong payments backbone for the commerce business. Hemant brings 2 decades of experience with leadership roles in companies like Visa, ICICI, HSBC, and ICICI TrueLife. Last but not least is Manish Patel. He's the founder and CEO of mSwipe Technologies. He's a qualified doctor from Mumbai University And therefore, you can ask him questions on the vaccine if you wish to at the end of this seminar. M5 is his fourth start. He started an alcohol business as a distributor. Prior to that, India's largest integrated vineyard. And he also set up and sold an ITES business on medical claim transcription processing for US-based physicians. So that's my panel. I myself am the CEO and MD of Worldline for South Asia, Middle East. Worldline is a large global player in the payment space. We've been in this business for 40 years and recently acquired Ingenico. And as a result of this, we are now the fourth largest payments company in the world. We are the number one in Europe and a leader in India as well. So it's with great pleasure that I finish the introduction. And before I start asking the questions, I'd like to just say a few words because I'm sure my colleagues around this panel after that will take over. So, as you know, demonetization and COVID-19 have been the two black swan events that have struck the economy and by extension the payments ecosystem. Demon had a dramatic impact on the payments ecosystem, and while the system itself expanded substantially, the long effect, the most sustainable one, was the way it manipulated and impacted the mindset of customers, wherein while cash was still king, it became the princely heir. And it's now for consumers, especially in urban settings, to go days without spending cash, whether it's a small kirana store or the large white goods store. This consumer minds, the willingness of consumers to use different digital payment instruments is what has allowed companies to drive innovation and new products in the last few years. And some of those who've driven these are around us on this virtual table. COVID-19 on the other hand has had a hugely damaging impact. Once it starts, there is going to be a new normal across the board for all of us in our lives. And it's going to be in digital payments as well. The work will be burnt into our collective conscience, our social distancing, sanitization, and some of these will reflect across all industries, including our own payment industry. The landscape of digital payments will change once we get out of recovery, especially since in the past, payments, especially card payments and cash payments, are all physical with high contact, and that's something that's becoming a taboo for us as we move forward. So both these events, in my view, had a material and substantive impact on the payment industry, multiple dimensions, from the changing business models to new technology, form factors, customer adoption, and of course, the role of government, RBI, and payment schemes. With that introduction, let me now move to my first question. I'd like to address this one to you, Manish, first. Let me start by asking you, what changes have you seen in the industry structure, business models, as a result of these two events that have hit us in the last 4 years? Manish, over to you.
Thanks, Deepak. So two of the key things that I have seen is number one, the smallest denominator, which is SMEs, are thinking hard on how to further digitize their business. Right? I mean, I haven't seen that in my 8-9 years in this business. The second one is there's this huge merging of online and offline payments. Right? I mean, to date, the industry has always been very well segmented. You've had offline payments and you've had online payments, and these have been catered by different participants and service providers. And the big thing that I'm seeing now is everyone wants unified payments, right? I mean, they don't want to be dealing with 5 different service providers for 5 different types of payments that they need to accept at their establishment. So these are the two big should I say trends that we are seeing.
Let me go to Hemant. Manish manages machines at hundreds of thousands of physical outlets, and he has the view, and you are the exact opposite. Tell us what you think has changed in the industry, in the business models.
Yeah, I think I bring in from a consumer's point of view. I think we are seeing a massive explosion in digital adoption. To your point, I think Demon actually made people wake up to digital payments and seriously we started seeing initial adoption. It happened, March at the time UPI launched around Demon, and it really played a key role in seeding that in consumers' initial adoption. What I think what UPI, COVID has really played is it has accelerated that adoption, and it has led to literally an explosion in organic adoption of digital payments. I mean, for us, the way we are seeing, there is increasingly, it's not about how do I learn, what do I do, it is about how do I do more. And every new use case that we open up to the consumers and try to help them make their life more digital, digitize any aspect of their life, we are seeing adoption. So I think what has changed from our side, I think deeper investments in bringing up more and more use cases to consumers, a clear acceptance. It's not just now about testing and trying to see how it works, but it is about making it like a way of life for consumers. And the way in which offline, I mean the transition to be able to bring into the fold millions of merchants because of a QR based acceptance model, which has helped us, scale across, to about 10, 11 million merchants across 400 cities, towns, villages, and moving it forward. But it has really helped accelerate the adoption because the cost of infra has gone down, and it is about, and it is merged with the fact that there is willingness in the ecosystem for people to. I mean, COVID has really made people wake up to the reality saying, look, contactless payment, QR based, or something that I really want to do makes it easy, and that is seeding habit more deeper in both sides of the ecosystem.
Thanks, Hemant. Sujata, over to you. So, 5 years ago, before Demon, the banks were king, right? The banks ran acquiring. Now, I don't know if that's true. And I've got two stalwarts here, and Manish and Hemant, for sure, not agree with the statement that banks were king. But you were a banker in those days, and you work with banks. So, what's your view on how the industry has changed, and what's the impact of COVID and prior to that of Demon? And what's the change that has come about in the industry as a result of this?
Sure. So I think, I would have put this industry structure broken up into about 5 clear players, right? And each of them have played very different roles over a period of time. So when Demon happened, I remember prepaid was the hero product, right? As in, we used to have digital wallets all over the place. A merchant onboarding was being pushed. We used to have these calls with Mighty, trying to convince them, and POS devices were at a shortage. That's the framework in which we existed post Demon for the first few months. And then we saw, and if you look at the way the players have evolved and how the businesses have moved, you can see that happen, right? Then, and at that time, BCs were playing a very big role because micro ATMs were the name of the game. People were, DMT was progressing at a very, very big pace. And as banks, we were becoming a participant, but not the change leader. We were kind of making sure that we worked very well with these players who were making changes at the hinterland of India. That was Demon. And over a period of time, I have seen that shift. And no thanks to the October 7, 2017 prepaid regulation, we had a drop in prepaid, and then UPI took off. And now we have UPI as a hero product for post-COVID. But what really is changing, as Manish and Hemant are saying, is the fact that today, I think the shift is slowly changing, and we are seeing cards becoming more and more prevalent in the corporate segment because you have to digitize. Checks are not going to be so easy to use. NEFT RTGS are becoming 24/7. So the whole construct and the business models has kind of shifted. And of course, UPI is playing a very big role in the consumer side. And I'm hoping that even on the there is a lot of I think plumbing work that needs to change, as Mr. Hota was speaking earlier on, for making it corporate enabled. But that's where cards will start playing a role, and that's how business models will shift, is what I feel.
So let me come to you, Mr. Hota, and I came to you last very deliberately because when PCI, when demonetization happened, we were told nobody knew about monetization until it happened. till a few hours after it happened was announced. PCI, what was your perspective when Demon got announced? You were leading the Payment Corporation of India. What was your sense of how this was going to impact the entire industry? And now, 4 years later, having seen Demon through and the arrival of COVID, it would be great to get your perspective on what your thinking was, how you saw it evolve. So over to you, Mr. Uday.
Thank you very much. Demonetization was certainly one of the toughest decisions that the country had taken. Uh, all on a sudden, 86% of the currency in terms of value uh, being taken out, sucked out from the economy. That means uh, for the transactions to happen, some alternative is required. Obviously, and you all know how the ATMs are also not working because the new kind of new denomination and the new notes of 500 and 2000 that came, they were of different sizes, and the ATMs were not ready. Even if the currency notes were printed, they were not made available. So there was a scarcity of currency, and this scarcity of currency has to be managed by the economy because the transactions would have to go on. Obviously, you will have to fall on digital payments. Thankfully, during the past 7-8 years before 2016 November, a lot of work had been done. Card acceptance had gone up, the number of POS terminals had gone up, possibly I suppose hardly about 700 to 800,000 to about 1.5 million, and EPS had come, Aadhaar Pay had come, and UPI had just been launched a few months back in April 2016, and it was taking shape. So all the really basic works have been done, and JAM Trinity, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile, that was the concept that everybody was really thinking on. And the idea of a less cash society was being talked about. So this was the opportunity to really to push electronic digital payments. But I must say, when I look back in 4 years, that was the period, obviously a big breakthrough in digital payments, but maybe a little forced one because the choices were very limited. Compared to now in the COVID period, in fact, the history is totally different. Number of POS terminals during the Demon period itself, nearly 1 million additional terminals came. Bharat QR was conceived, and Bharat QR came. Aadhaar Pay came. A lot of other alternative, and Bhim was launched by Prime Minister himself. And we all did not know about we knew about Bharat Interface for Money, even at NPCI. But Prime Minister said, this is on Bhim Rao Ambedkar, and that was the birthday also on 31st of December. So a whole lot of things in the Demon time came, and now in 4 years, a drastic change. Because that energy in the demonetization that came, that gave a lot of push. Everybody started believing that now the country is on a mission mode, regulator is working on a mission mode, and regulator, government, everybody is really serious about a less cash society, not cashless society. Governor Raghuram Rajan told time and again, it is a less cash society. So 4 years down the line, during the COVID period, it has been thanks to UPI and use case development, and the ecosystem also worked extremely well. All the big techs, fintechs, everybody really worked extremely well. And now the situation is much different. Now customers are in a position to give choice. Initial few months, there was a transactions came down, but now it has come up. The pre-COVID period, it has exceeded. And now I suppose a significant development. That is how now that yes, it is possible to have a less cash society. That spirit has come. The innovators are many, the players are many. They are really working all innovative things, and India is at the center of the retail payments. In fact, India is almost leading the globe in the digital payments in the retail sector. I'm not talking about the large value payments. In the retail sector is definitely India is on the forefront in, and no international discussion is complete without reference to the innovations taken place in India, UPI, and even the biometric based payment. AEPS, the kind of work, magic that AEPS has done during the COVID period, particularly on disbursement of the DBT payments, that is phenomenal. And the acceptance infrastructure has grown. A lot of regulatory changes have taken place, including the creation of acceptance development fund and grievance redressal mechanism, and now the innovation council. So a lot of things have happened. So demonetization made a beginning, or uh, made the country to dream that, well, we can be substantially different and we can lead over the rest of the nation. And now this COVID period, it has proven that we can really do it. Banks, as it is, they have shown extreme resilience. The banking system in India is much talked about, not just payments. That banking system, because of their operations, they are extremely resilient, and obviously a significant uh, you know, contribution comes from the payment system, digital payment system.
Thank you, Mr. Oh, no, that's okay. Thank you. So let me go back to you, Manish. And as I was listening to Mr. Hota, I was reminded of the complex of payments for a consumer. So since the last 4 years, we had wallets, of course, have cards. We still have checks. We still have cash. We still have QR. So as a consumer, and in terms of consumer adoption, how do you see the shape going forward? Uh, how do you think consumers are going to adopt these different form factors of issuance instruments? And which these think is really going to continue to be important as we go forward? I know today UPI is the name of the game, and UPI is the most talked about. But I wanted your view on all the other issuance form factors and how consumers are going to adopt them.
Deepak, if you were to, I have a very simplistic view of how all of this has evolved, right? Ultimately, payment instruments have evolved basis technology and evolution of the internet. The core process is, how do you debit your bank account or your store of money or value, right? And in the pre-internet era, that was a check. Ultimately, your bank account got set up, and you could access that using a check, or you could access that using a debit card at an ATM. The moment you had the internet, you had the ability to access the store of value using NEFT, RTGS, and online payment gateways, right? Which allowed you to use your card to be able to access your bank account. And with the advent of mobile, you've had an evolution, because the phone can be an identifier, a unique identifier, and if that is linked to your bank account, you can use your phone as a payment instrument again to access your store of value. So I think, while I'm not an expert and we don't really participate much on the consumer side, there's a clear evolution basis, mainstream underlying technologies that have evolved, which consumers, businesses and fintechs and banks have actually exploited to build payment instruments that allow you to, very seamlessly and securely access the store of value. But what I think goes unspoken is the huge problem that this causes merchants, right? And that's where we're so involved. On the merchant side, the merchant just wants to get paid, right? And today, for the merchant to get paid, earlier it was super simple. He had cash, he carried his cash at the end of the day, he's done, right? then came cards. So yes, cash and cards. And now you've got cash, cards, wallets, online payments. You've got UPI, you've got QR, you've got contactless, right? And for small business, this starts becoming extremely challenging from the perspective of acceptance, recon, and I think not enough effort being put there, because ultimately, pretty much like you don't have multiple POS terminals, one for Visa, one for MasterCard, one for American Express, right? Today what I think has happened is that the merchant has got 20 QRs, he's got 3 POS terminals, and he's got cash, right? And yes, all of the money does flow into his bank account, but recon is a problem, right? I mean, if you really talk to merchants, right, it is an issue. And I think this is where the next the next should I say burst of effort needs to be provided from my view, right? The consumer has found a way to access his bank account, right? Whether it's by card, whether it's by contactless payments using his app and a QR code, or simply going and drawing money from his bank account and paying cash, right? So I don't think it's a consumer problem anymore. It's more of the acceptance problem. How do small, mid-sized, and large businesses seamlessly accept all of this, which works without much effort on their end?
So Sujata, over to you. Manish is a very intelligent guy. He understands medicine, he understands alcohol, and he understands payments. Some of us don't understand so many different payment instruments to use, how to use, and especially the common man on the street. What is your on how consumers adopt these new instruments, and what is going forward? I mean, COVID has defined something. Prior to that, Demon defined something. Where is it headed next? From a consumer point of view, describe the acceptance side of it, and the what happens with the merchant. On the consumer side, what's your perspective?
Sure. So if I define this entire payments industry, it's the payables and the receivables side of business interacting with each other, right? Now, as Manish has articulated, so many different formats of payments have come into the industry, and I am sensing that each consumer see, first we have a very heterogeneous set, right? People are very different in their asks in terms of what they are going to use, and secondly, it's also very contextual. Like where you use a UPI versus where you use a cash versus where you use a check is actually very contextual to the kind of transaction that's happening. And I think while so many instruments have come to fore, like we have contactless payments, we have QR code based payments, we have UPI, then you have prepaid, then you have debit card, so many credit card and so on. Why somebody uses what instrument is contextual to 2-3 different aspects of a consumer's need. But above everything else, I think the two things that are, that stand out, and which is very visible in the way in which, you will see payment flows changing, is the user experience, in the sense that is depending on the point of the transaction and the user experience required over there, you will find the transaction consummation happening in that sense. Okay, and the second is the possibility of closure of transaction in the lowest piece possible point of time and in the most secure manner. And I also believe that this is driven by the fact that today I see that people's attention spans are very low, in the sense that they do not have the time to wait on transactions to get consummated or go over and so on. So typically, people who are able to give consumers the chance to close a transaction at speed and at the levels at which you want to do it, things happen. So for instance, if you are making a college payment, is somebody opening up a UPI and making a payment? No. They are quickly doing an NEFT and RTGS transfer, because that segment has not been attacked, and so every consumer will just go to the website, either put a card and make a transaction, or he'll do a NEFT RTGS transaction. But if he's paying a small one-on-one transaction payment, he will do it through a UPI, right? So this is where I'm saying that somewhere, as Manish is saying, on the acceptance side, we'll need to make it ubiquitous and a single framework. Even on the issuance side, on the payable side, a lot of work needs to happen to make all the payment flows interplayable. Now, just imagine for a moment that at one time, when you made IMPS as a transaction payment, you used it because it was 24/7. So largely you will take small payments 24/7, you would use IMPS. The moment NEFT became 24/7, today people are not necessarily loyal to IMPS because even NEFT can be done 24/7. Now RTGS has become 24/7. Now, what is going to differentiate? It is going to be 100% the quickness of performance on that platform, where you're not going to have a single reject, right? So this is how I see the form factors playing out. And obviously, the person who will capture this very well would be somebody who is able to take all these form factors and come up with one single model for somebody to use all contextlessly except for cards, because everything can be digitalized and virtualized now. And I'm sure most people who are in the issuance business are thinking about it right now, including banks. I'm sure they're thinking about it.
So, Hemant, over to you. You guys have made full use of technology and understanding of consumers, built up a fantastic franchise. What is your view on customer adoption, use of technology, form factors, and where is it going?
So, before starting, I'm really glad we have this, discussion, because I remember, a decade back when Manish was looking at, experimenting with bringing in the first set of, he was the first amongst the ones to bring in the mobile POS, and then we were debating how do we grow acceptance. And today where we are, and we are looking at, explosion of the work that has happened by everyone in the ecosystem, on the mobile POS side, on the POS side, and all across, where we are looking at explosion of, on both sides, on the issuing side and the acquiring side. So, in effect, I personally feel that, there has been this democratization of payments which is happening in India, which is really, really needed for a lot of us to play, to think differently, bring out new form factors, bring in new technology, play both on the consumer side and the merchant side. So I think the challenges around multiple instruments, recon, or all of these are interesting ones, because it's riding on the top of a surge in just the number of players playing in, the technology that is going in, the form factors that's going in. So that's a great out for India. Specifically, I just break the question in two parts. When we look at technology, I think what is really also helping when we look at technology is that it's becoming one. There is more and more talk of interoperability, and interoperable payments really grow in any ecosystem. It's playing out in India. It's played out in other geographies also. So interoperability is the key thing. Second is the access and financial inclusion that the access can drive. The access becomes so easy because like the credit and debits that we talk of, underlying instruments are just two now. It's either a bank account or a credit card. It's been that way. But the debit to bank account has become far so simple with interoperable payments paying out, which leads to access and which is leading to financial inclusion. So for us today, more than 40-50% of our new customers are coming in from beyond tier 3 and beyond tier 3 town, cities and villages. So we are seeing acceptance in 4, 5, 6 tier 4, 5, 6 towns, villages. So that is really playing out because the access is now very easy. And technology has enabled this, which is, and this has been possible because the solutions are becoming more mobile first. So because it is mobile first, India is on a smartphone market with data explosion. It is really helping seed the customer behavior. It is creating access and leading to financial inclusion. I mean, connectivity over time pushes convergence. That is how it is. If you have more connectivity, you will see convergence of technology help playing out. And for a country like India, I mean, you can look at it in three ways. Solving for India 1, India 2, and India 3. The first, India 1 is just 110 billion, which is easy, where you will see acceptance, where you'll see people paying out. But solving for the next 100 million and then the billion after that, reaching to a billion after that, the India 2 and 3 is going to be really difficult. And that's where the form factor really plays out on how do you have low cost scalable infra which you can take payments across to masses and into the hinterlands. This is where For us, UPI is played out really well because the UPI QR is something which can be scaled and taken to hinterlands. We have huge team which are now trying to get into tier 4, 5, 6 cities, towns to drive acceptance. Lastly, I would say the deluge of data and AI, or more than AI ML right now playing a role in really helping on the technology side in reducing frauds, simplifying payment experience. I mean, for the first time in the country, you've seen in last 5-7 years, where on the consumer side, riding on a payment trail, there is opportunity to innovate by by players outside the banking domain, and it's really helps. It's a great synergy between banking and the tech play, where you can actually innovate on the consumer side, riding on the payment rails. So that's where it's really playing out well for a country, I would say.
So, Hotaji, last question for you before we go to some questions we have from the audience. How can the government, how can payment schemes help and drive and make digital payments more successful today as we speak? We're still not out of COVID, and as I mentioned earlier, COVID will see further change in behavior. How do you think payment schemes, government, and AI can help foster digital payments?
I suppose, in my view, government and the regulator are doing superb job. And if we want that every Indian is touched by one or other electronic payments, that used to be my keyword, theme while I talk within NPCI, touching everybody with one or other electronic payments. And necessary that every Indian would make digital payments. If some Indians, like as Hemant says, India 1, India 2, India 3, if a significant part of India 3 also just receives the digital payment, that itself is a big step forward. And I suppose it is largely met, as you would have seen, the DBT time, Aadhaar based payments, DBT payments, about 500 million people, the payment they received digitally. How can more and more can happen? Obviously, the customer education is required, but if it is extremely convenient, education load on education is much less. And if it is extremely convenient, how would the customer see that it is very? If there is any problem, the customer has somebody to ask. Means the grievance redress. If there is a fraud, immediately the money is get back. Regulator has come out with zero liability clause. There has to be an access, large number of customer points where digital payments are accepted. That has to be there. So while these initiatives are on, parallelly, and number of such instruments are coming out to meet the varying needs of in various contexts, as Sujata was telling, contextual payments, to varying needs in various forms of payments are going on. At the same time, the regulator and the government would have to think which are the areas we must target. Like, one of the thing is, how can we make that all bus services, at least in metropolitan cities, 100% digital? How can we make it? Is it possible? In the Western cities, that one culture shock that we get when we really, a few years back, when we are traveling abroad, is, you go to the metro, you go to the bus, unless you buy a really card, you cannot really travel. So this mobility payment, transport, particularly in buses, trains, and everything, how can we make it? Obviously, contactless is the way to go, and the work has really just started, and possibly it is a matter of time. So the targeted way use cases has to be there. First, in my view, is this transit, that is unexplored area, a big opportunity. Lot of innovators would have to come in, adhering to the standards. And second is the bill payment. Even now, with so much of digitization, hardly about 20% of the bills are paid digitally. 80% of the bills. Who all can do? Government agencies, electricity supply authorities, different kind of payments. How can these bill payments be, we can migrate people to digital platform? A very concerted effort by everybody. While the instruments will go on, everything, at the same time, applications for specific applications, a very focused thematic uh, focus would have to be there by entire industry. So that is where really, like financial inclusion payment, that is where this NUE relevance comes. Because RBI is thinking of NUE, if these players come, can they really operate in a thematic way and really work on this? So this is I feel some strategy, a national level strategy is necessary to cover one particular segment, the way few segments are largely digital. Thank you.
Thank you, Otaji. Thank you very much for that. I'm sorry, we have just a minute left. There was a question which said, what is the role played by these uncertainties in our response to these challenges in driving consumer adoption and how best to ensure stickiness? I think Sujata did touch on how you can drive customer stickiness or consumer stickiness by giving them a payment service that's works all the time, is convenient for that specific use. So we're almost out of time. We just have a minute or two. If there's anybody on the panel who would like to say a last word, it's open to all of you. Okay.
I would suggest we are on the right track. I suppose a little more focus on really, because we'll have to set a bigger vision that would drive everybody. And that bigger vision appears to be the less caste society, financial inclusion, every Indian getting touched by one or other electronic payments. Such bigger things should bring everybody together. That is how I feel. Something should be binding, should bring together for a strategy. Or else individually, all players are great innovators, they are great jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And panel, Manish, Sujata, Hemant, and Mr. Hota, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on this panel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Special thanks to our attendees for the enlightening conversation. It was a pleasure to listen to you. Special thanks to our sponsors and our attendees. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Itself, which is an important part of the ecosystem, right? So Suhail, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, guys.
And very quickly, the way I want to do it is I just want to there are a few things that are top of mind for me. I'll ask you these questions, pick your brains, and then as we progress through the next 30 minutes, there are questions from the audience, which I'm sure there are many. I'm going to take those, right, and see how much we can cover in these 30 minutes, right?
Absolutely.
So Suhail, just jumping in, right? Bharat Pay, right? Superb startup, last couple of years, the kind of growth that you guys have had. You guys are foraying into various other segments like lending and things like that, right? So when you look at the customer for Bharat Pay, it's the merchant, right? And we talk a lot about the consumer, the profile of the consumer, the millennials, that aspect of things. But when we talk about merchant as a profile itself, right? First, understanding the customer and the nuanced understanding of the customer is extremely critical for us to even build out those customer journeys. If you have to look at comfort or simplification or providing a wow experience, we need to understand the customer first. So from a Bharat Pay standpoint, which is doing pioneering work in this space, I want to understand, how do you think about the merchant as a customer, right from, let's say, acquisition to advocacy?
No, absolutely. I think, as you rightly said, there are a lot of companies which are solving the consumer side of the problem. And we felt that merchant somehow was an equally critical element of this transaction. It's sort of getting lost, right? So that's where we started. And if you think of a merchant, we operate in a country where I will say margins which a merchant has are anywhere from a 5% to 15%. This is not a developed country. where a small merchant will be probably earning 25% to 30% on a transaction, right? So therefore, the most important element we set to solve was how can we make the payment experience free for the merchant, right? So because if you are asking a merchant to pay anywhere from 1% to 2% to do a digital transaction, it's eating into his already thin margin, and it is counterintuitive to making the economy cashless, right? So, and that's where we started, and we were sort of the first company to launch interoperable QR-based UPI solution with no transaction cost, right? So this was even before the government made UPI free.
That's a game changer.
For the first few months, we were losing money and we were paying MDR to the banks and taking this on ourselves. I think the thinking was over a period of time, the economy will move towards a zero transaction fees. And that's when we launched the QR codes, had massive success and scale up. Obviously, took a time to tell the merchant this is free because they had been used to other solutions which would charge them like a wallet. And as merchants become more and more educated about this, they've sort of taking this up. And the same theme, we've recently launched Bharat Swipe, which is our POS machine. And the thinking again is similar, that we want to take this to a zero transaction fee business. Today we have a cute way of doing that. Let's not spend time on it, but the thinking is to take it to zero, right? So once the payment leg is solved, and once the merchant knows that I can use the Bharat Pay solutions to actually accept payment for free, that's where the real business gets built, right? Because this is, as a merchant, the biggest problem any merchant in India has is probably access to credit, right? So
that's right.
And as more of our platform gets used for payments, we become better at sort of underwriting a merchant for credit. We become better to enable other services for him, whether it's send money, whether it is as simple as insurance for his shop or family. And that sort of is where we hopefully make money. But the intent there is also to be to offer merchants a solution which no one else provides them, right? And many of these are people who don't have access to formal lines of credit because they don't necessarily have a large banking track record. They don't have many of them are new to credit in the formal way. So how can you underwrite such merchants and solve their most critical business problems? One is to get payments for free, and B is to sort of open a line of credit and other services to them. So that's at least what we set out to solve. First 2 years have been exciting, but still a long way to go.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you guys have massive expansion plans. Like you guys are going to get from 30 to 65 cities, and as you scale so rapidly, how do you think about customer centricity or merchant centricity? What does customer centricity or comfort mean to Bharat Pay? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's an important question. We spend a lot of time debating about this. A lot of resources of ours actually go after this. I think the first and the most critical is trust, right? So merchants needs to trust you with their money. It is very easy to give a loan to someone. It is very difficult to ask him to keep his money with you or tell him you will settle his transactions, right? So therefore, I think the first thing before anything else we set out to solve was UPI is a complicated transaction, both on the transacting side as well as on the receiving side. It has NPCI, it has the bank, it has the issuer, it has the acquirer. Each payment goes through like 4 such checks, right? So, and therefore, historically, UPI transactions have had a relatively low success rate. And when I say low, I don't mean like horrible, but 92, 93%, and similar settlement rates into the bank. And this is a big problem, right? If 8% of your transactions are not going through and 8% of the time the money is not coming to your bank account on time, it sort of defeats the purpose and beats the trust, right? And that's what we actually spend enough and more than enough amount of resources, whether it's in terms of capital, whether it's in terms of technology, whether it's in terms of people, because that's sort of the table stakes, right? And I think what we've done on that side has sort of really built that trust, right? We use AI and ML to even like say which bank will be used for settlement at what time of the day based on like historical failure rates, which has, I think net we have a transaction success rate of more than 99% and a settlement rate of 99.6% on time. And that's sort of, to me, I will not say it's still merchant delight, but it is at least table stakes for you to have a conversation about delight, right? So I think that's one we do a lot of time on. The second is, this is a business which requires short cycle credit, right? You need money for working capital, you need money to take sort of inventory, and therefore your classical bank mein jao, paper submit karo, and take a loan in 2 weeks doesn't work, right? So what we really focus on is how quickly can I give a loan dispersal, right? What I really track is a North Star metric for us is how many of the loans which were applied to are actually disbursed in 2 hours of application, right? So, and like many of the loans actually are today disbursed in like 15 seconds of application. But the real metric I track is are 99% of the loans which I am set to give going to get under 2 hours. It's still not there. I think we are working a lot on the technology side, on the underwriting side to get there. But I think day by day, we are sort of progressing on this metric. And this is an important metric for me because if I can't give him a loan in 2 days, he probably doesn't require the loan any longer, right? So I think that's sort of the second. And then there are similar metrics we track on some of the other products like Swipe, etc., right? But the core thesis is merchant experience comes from table stakes come from trust. The delight comes from how quickly you are able to reply to his queries, how quickly you are able to disburse him loans, etc., etc.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Wonderful. So once, Suhail, you have that nuanced understanding of what customer centricity or what customer delight means, and you kind of break it down into the metrics that your organization needs to look at, the North Star metrics and various other things. How do you give us a peekaboo into the visions in the management meetings? How do you guys break it down, and how does the whole goal setting exercise happen, and how do you cascade it to your organization? How does that process?
Absolutely. I think, and as you rightly said, it starts with the metrics, right? So what are you optimizing for? I think the 4 or 5 metrics we look at. One is the transaction success rate, right? And we've done crazy amount of work that sometimes where a transaction would be rejected, we underwrite the transaction saying we know why this failure is coming. The normal loop on UPI will take 7 to 4 weeks or 7 days to 4 weeks to solve this, but we are as BharatPe underwriting this transaction through our own money, right? So I think this is a transaction success rate metric, which, as I was telling you, is about 99%, but we want to really take it to as close to 100 as we can. There is a settlement ratio on, as a merchant, you just click that I need this money in my bank. How quickly does the money go into his bank? Some people prefer instant settlement. Some prefer end of day settlement because I don't want to see 50 transactions hitting my bank account on a day. Every merchant is unique. We give first the merchant the option of enabling that. And then we again sort of live up to 99.6% on that. And again, the thinking there is how can we take it to 100%? I think these are two metrics where we've probably done most work. The third metric we briefly talked about is the loan metric, right? So when we started disbursing loans, I think the earliest we could disburse a loan was 1 day, and on an average it took 4 days to disburse a loan, and some loans went as high as 2 weeks. And I think we've consciously broken that step by step around tech, around product, around actually KYCing and using some of the eNACH, eKYC facilities available to say, how do we bring this systematically down to 2 hours, right? And that's sort of the North Star metric we chase, that 99% of my loans should get within 2 hours. Today, we probably operate at something like 85%, but sort of the endeavor is to get to 99%. And I think the last metric I really solve for is self-serve. How many of the merchants don't have to talk to a customer service agent, right? So they should talk to me only when it is when they find it more comfortable, or when I can't solve a problem, right? So we use a lot of AI ML to first ensure that the problem doesn't come, or if it has to come, we can predict it. For example, UPI on ICICI is going to be down for the next 2 hours. By the way, comes at a cost of transaction because the merchant will take away my QR code and keep it on the side for 2 hours. But to me, merchant not getting stuck in a transaction loop is a lot more important than losing 2 hours of transactions, right? So again, how many problems are we able to predict? How many problems we are able to solve without merchant having to talk to me is something we like progressively track. Today, our native app, as we call, or WhatsApp for business app, which we track, is 88% of my complaints or inquiries are purely solved through that, right? And again, the endeavor is to sort of take this up, right? So what we've done is we've taken 4-5 North Star merchant metrics. We've not taken any business metric, to be honest. Business metrics we look at once a month. Because we fundamentally believe that if you are doing the right thing for the merchant, you are solving his life, business will follow, right? Because business is out there to be built. There is $800 billion of credit demand in the country. Whether I become a 50 billion player, whether I become a 75 billion player, that's it's still like very large, right? So let's not solve for business. Let's solve for sort of the merchant experience and merchant metrics, and business will sort of follow.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that. So I just want to quickly segue. You spoke about self-serve, and I just want to quickly segue into one of the questions that the attendees are asking about the role of AI/ML in enhancing customer experience, right? So if you can just elaborate a little bit on that in the BharatPe context.
Yeah, so I think let's actually start with the simplest example, which is the transaction and the settlement success rate, right? So I think what and the good thing about AI ML is, like, in a manual process, as more transactions happen, the more problematic it becomes, the more errors come. Whereas on a technology-based platform, the more the transactions happen, the more faster the system learns, and higher is the sort of the accuracy of the output it throws.
Absolutely.
And so therefore we are also continuing to improve. But where we use a lot of AI ML is actually on going bank by bank, saying what is the likely success rate of a transaction going through, what is the likely success rate of a settlement going through. For each of the banks, what is the historical best time to do settlements where their systems are least loaded and all of that. And we use that to sort of route the transaction, right? So a merchant A can get money from 20 bank accounts. His money eventually needs to go into one bank account, but where I route the transaction from the consumer to him can go through 20, 30 such combinations, right? So, so I dynamically adjust my routing based on sort of the learnings which the engine throws up based on the transaction volume which is flowing through that, right? So, so I think that's the use case which impacts the merchant the most, and therefore there's a lot of work which happens on that side. I think the second place where we do use a lot of intelligence analytics is actually on credit underwriting, right? So a lot of these merchants are actually very new to banking. 90% of my merchants are actually new to credit. They have never taken a loan. By definition, their CIBIL score at best will be average, if not poor. Because CIBIL score is actually a function of how long you've been a banker, how many loans have you taken and paid on time, right? If a guy has not taken a loan and therefore has never had to pay it on time, by definition, most conventional underwriting logic will say, don't give him a loan, right? So how do you build the transaction history, money flowing through the system history? How do you use, like, even his phone data around, like, how many contacts does he have, what type of transactions does he do, to actually enable more and more people to get credit? And how do you actually use his repayment behavior to reduce his cost of credit over a period of time, right? So that's where, again, a lot of the technology is used. And the last bit is the chat box and, like, solving customer grievances, which I will not repeat myself. We talked about a fair bit already.
Wonderful, wonderful. There's one question on merchant education and onboarding, right? And it's a big challenge. So just talk about how you kind of solving that problem at BharatPe.
Yeah, so and it's a legitimate problem, and and this becomes starker and starker as you go down the tiers in the country, right?
That's
So a
right.
tier one merchant who's probably had exposure to three of us understands this better. A tier three merchant who's probably only seen maybe a phone pay or a Paytm understands this lesser, especially given their earlier products were not interoperable. Their earlier products were wallet based where there was a transaction fee, right? So, and that's why, by the way, our merchant onboarding process is not as digital as we would have liked to, right? So we are a predominantly offline merchant acquirer, right? So feet on street will go to the merchant and explain him the product, explain a use case, do a trust test transaction with him, do a test settlement into the bank account with him. We have sort of a orientation to Bharat Pay and how this works sort of call, which happens to just give him comfort about, I think there needs to be comfort around a few things. One, this is free. Are you sure? That's like a big question which comes. Second is, my money will hit my bank account when I want it, or will it be a T+1, T+2, T+3 settlement? And see, is this transaction secure? Will my money get lost, right? So, and then obviously there is the additional on top of that on what else can I do with the network? Can I send money to people? Can I buy an insurance? Can I get a loan? What do I need to get a loan? Do I need a credit card acceptance machine? Again, big shop where I sell a credit card acceptance machine is, are you sure there is no rental? Are you sure there is no potential to no transaction cost? Because they've been like sort of being at the wrong end of people trying to make money off merchants versus on the consumer side. And therefore, a lot of this is required. And therefore, what we do a lot on resorting to physical people visiting the store and explaining them. And then for each of the products, once the guy is comfortable with the app, we keep on like sort of refreshing the content on the app and sending it through push notifications. Like if you go onto a Bharat Pay app, how to accept transaction, like such a basic stuff would be explained by a video, right? So because it's simple for you and me, it's not simple for like 80% of the merchant base.
Understood. Yeah. Wonderful. Awesome. So players like you yourselves, right, new age fintech organizations probably don't have to grapple with a lot of legacy that some traditional banks and insurance companies, but I'm sure there are a ton of challenges that you guys have to navigate on a daily basis. So what are some of those challenges and how are you using technology and the various other things to kind of circumvent those and move ahead?
No, I think we briefly talked about this in the last question itself. I think there are two challenges. One is education, merchant education. We spoke about that. How do you tell the merchant that this is free? How do you tell a merchant this is seamless? How do you tell a merchant this is fast? And the second is actually the concept of trust, right? Is it really secure? Where is my money, right? And in the offline mode, it becomes even more critical, right? Because in the online setup, payment happens first, transfer of goods happens later, right? So therefore payment fails, no problem, right? So offline payment success rate is like, I think 75, 80%. And that's fine, because if the payment is not happening, no goods will be sent. Consumer is not more educated that this money will come back to my account, no problem, right? But on a merchant in a physical store, the guy is saying, give me the money, I will give you the goods. And if the transaction is not happening, like how does he give the good, right? So, and therefore, this trust on the payment will be seamless. It's very important to build. And no matter what we say to the merchant in person on the first time, it gets built actually only after the merchant is using the product for a few weeks and seeing for himself, right? So therefore, we call this a merchant handholding kit, right? We believe a merchant who crosses 50 transactions on the platform stays on the platform. Most of the churn drop-offs happen actually in the first 15 transactions. India also has a habit of saying yes to everything, right? So if you go to a store, sir, QR code laga do, bole, haan, please laga do. And then he will keep the QR code on the side and never use it, right? So, so how do you handhold the merchant for the first 50 transactions and build that trust that the platform works, is seamless, money comes into his account without any deduction of charges? That sort of gets that built. But the challenge is to sort of build that trust, and especially as you go deeper into India. And the challenge is to sort of get merchant educated about what all can he do with his money, and he doesn't have to necessarily always handle so much of cash.
Got it. Wonderful. I just want to take one quick question from the audience, Sunil. How is customer satisfaction tracked? Are current matrices like CSAT and NPS relevant, and are they enough to track digital experience?
So they're relevant for sure. We do track our CSAT scores. We do track our complaints. But I think this is also a world where customer is like just a click of a button away from you, right? So instead of like resorting to your conventional CSATs, we have our own set of metrics we want to ensure we are on top of. And then we are what we really track is how much time is the merchant spending on the app and meaningfully spending on the app, not because he's getting lost in our app. And and that sort of gives us a sense as merchant does more and more transactions with us, as he uses more use cases on the product with us. That's a good enough sign on that merchant is happy with you, right? So but having said that, we do CSATs. We even use external agencies to do a what you call a tracking survey on product happiness, not happiness, understanding of our product offerings, standalone and versus competition. But those are more proof of stamps on that what you are doing is actually working. What I really, my product and tech is sort of evolved enough for me to get a leading indicator on that, right? And though one metric we do track on the customer experience is how many of the problems are actually solved without human intervention. How many of the problems do we get right on the first attempt, right? So because this is we do 8,000 transactions a minute, and like, we do whatever 80 million transactions a month. You're bound to have some issues. So therefore, it's not necessarily about. Obviously, you try to reduce the issues as much as possible, but what is really important is how quickly do you sort of course correct and get the merchant his money back, right? So and therefore, first time intervention solution without human intervention is like a more the way I see it.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think just quick time check. I think we have another 2-3 minutes. One last question, Suhail, is where do you see this segment, this space, 2-3 years down the line? What major changes?
Absolutely. So I think
how do you see this evolving?
Yeah, so I think digital transactions will continue to grow. There is, I think, no stopping. COVID has been horrible for many things, but has been great for digital payments and the penetration of it. My parents would have never used a digital payment mode beyond a credit card, but now they are using UPI left, right, center, right? So, so I think this UPI, as you know, just clocked 2 million transactions last month. Probably has grown another 10% this month. I think this will continue to grow. I would not be shocked if this is like 5x, 6x of this in the next 5 years, right? So, so digital transactions will continue to grow. The real problem which needs to be solved, and I think will get solved over the next few years, is the credit unlocking to this segment, right? So, $800 billion of like sort of unaddressed credit is not great for the economy, is not great for the merchant, and I think companies like us, companies like Cred, many other players who are sort of trying to solve this will get a handle of this, where a large part of this 800 million will be serviceable, 800 billion will be serviceable. That's where the sort of real unlock of the economy will happen. And I think that's sort of important unlock. Many of the other things like insurance penetration, etc., will obviously ride the wave of this, right? But I think we don't have to do anything to solve for digital payments. I think we've done enough, and that will continue to grow. Stable regulations is sort of the only thing which is probably credit unlocking. I think industry will do a lot of work on, and everything else will sort of ride that way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Suhail. I think we packed quite a bit in 30 minutes. Really appreciate you taking the time out and kind of educating us on what's happening in the segment and the way forward. Really appreciate it. Back to Srishti.
Thanks, Karthik. Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you to both of you. Thank you to our agenda partner, PayPoint, payment partner, PayU, and design partner, Ethinos. Stay tuned for a lot more.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.